And we will be starting shortly. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Track 2 stakeholder meeting. My name is Robin Taylor, and I work in the Office of Consumer Services in the Retail Access section. Next slide, John. Thank you. Let's run over the meeting procedures for today. All attendees are muted upon entry. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand to speak. You can see in the box on the screen, there's a hand that you would click on to raise at the bottom of the participants panel near the right hand of the screen. When your hand is raised, staff will call on you to state your question or comment. When you're finished speaking, please hit the icon again to lower your hand. Any callers calling in by phone can dial *3 to raise their hand. Our Q&A will not be used. It's for only technical issues. So if you are having a technical issue, you can use that. We are not using the chat function, and the meeting is recorded and will be posted after we complete today. Next screen, John. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to run over the green gas. We'll do a quick overview. We will have a presenter on green gas. That'll be Angela Shore from NRG. And then we will have a discussion. The definition of small non-residential overview. We're going to have a presentation on that from David Lundin and Marabito. We will also have a discussion about dual commodity issues from Lon Lucas of Marathon. And then we will discuss next steps and contact info. I believe we have a question. John, if you want to read out the question for me.
They're unmuted.
Okay, great.
Robin, it's Ron Lucas. I cannot get in. How do you get in? Is there alternate instructions? It's not letting me into the webcast. I'm on the phone.
I sent you the login and the password.
Oh, okay. I'll try. Okay. I'll ask to put my hand down and do *3 again.
Thank you. Okay, John, so next slide, please. Okay, so let's just quickly run over the green gas products. We've seen this in our previous Track 2 meetings from the January 2021 order. There's some bullet points here. We find at present that we lack requisite assurances that the natural gas bundle proposals will provide value-added energy-related services that are consistent with New York's clean and renewable energy goals, so as to justify providing a permanent exception. We have the Track 2 proceedings will provide the needed opportunity for engagement between interested parties and for staff to permit a better understanding of proposals related to green gas products. The Commission anticipates that the collaboration will allow interested ESCO industry representatives to address concerns related to both the provision of value to customers, including the match between marketing and value a customer actually receives, and the manner in which green gas proposals relate to New York's aggressive clean energy goals. Regarding the state energy's clean energy goal, interested ESCOs may wish to address the possibility that an unintended consequence of ESCOs offering green gas products is that customers will be incented to either consume more natural gas or, relatedly, reduce their use of natural gas over time, less than what they would have otherwise had commodity not been included in the green gas bundle. These concerns should not be understood as exhaustive, or as Commission conclusions on relevant issues. The concerns are intended to be helpful illustrations of issues interested ESCOs should address, and that other parties may wish to address in the Track 2 proceedings. Next slide. Green gas proposals submitted in 2020 generally had the following characteristics. We had carbon offset products, and we had REC products. I'm not going to read through these. You're all familiar with this. Let's move ahead, John. Okay, so we have Angela Shore on the line today, and she is going to bring up a discussion on green gas. John, if you want to start her slide, and you can unmute Angela.
Hi, good morning. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Great. Today I'm going to do a little recap of the green gas products. So as you'll note on my first slide here, I decided to call it something a little different today. I feel like in today's industry, there's some negative connotations surrounding gas, and I thought it might be helpful for us to look at this in a more positive light. So throughout my presentation, you will see the term cleaner heat used. We can call it anything that we like, but I thought it would be helpful to just start referring to it as something a little more positive. Next slide, please. So just to recap a little bit, I presented on this topic at the last Track 2 meeting. Since that meeting, several parties filed petitions for waiver extensions to be able to continue to serve customers on those products. Those petitions were noticed in the state register, and there is a comment period involved in those. In the meantime, we thought it would be helpful to sort of take the previous discussions that we've had, including my presentation from the last meeting, and maybe put them on paper in like a straw proposal. So a group of ESCOs worked together behind the scenes to sort of develop a straw proposal, which was sent to DPS staff, I guess it was last week or the week before, just sort of for discussion purposes and to help gain a better understanding of the topic. It seemed like there were a lot of questions raised at the last presentation, so I thought it would be helpful to sort of put it down on paper. Next slide, please. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I presented on this last time. All of the details were in there surrounding the, some of the products. That presentation is available on DMM, so anybody can go back and look at it. I do want to point out some additional thoughts and ideas today, so hopefully, gain a better understanding of what we're talking about. Next slide, please. So the bottom line is that people are using gas, right? We didn't just snap our fingers and all the gas just disappeared. So I think that's important to understand for this purpose. ESCO, we don't have the ability to go to a customer's house with a wrench and actually hook up a new gas service. So these customers are already connected They're already using gas, so that's really important. We're not adding anything here. As we try to transition away from gas, right, that's not going to happen overnight. So we have to try to do something in the interim. A green product will help the environment and also help New York meet its CLCPA goals. Every little bit that we can do helps toward these goals, and it's important to remember that with these products as well. Cleaner heat will not cause more gas usage. I think I stated that in my last presentation, right? For the most part, customers are more conscious of what's going on. They're more conscious of the environment when they proactively choose these products. And it's not going to cause anybody to go out and say, hey, now I can use all I want. That's really not how it works. I'm a solar customer, and I am constantly looking at my solar, not only my usage, but also the solar that is provided from my panels. And trust me, if anything, it's making me use less power, because I'm constantly looking at it and constantly watching. So we find that the same is true for the gas products. As stated previously, Green Mountain has been offering these products for a number of years. We have not seen any uptick or increase in gas usage as a result. This is simply a way to take the current customers and current usage and provide a means to help offset the emissions. That's it. We're not, trying to connect more customers, trying to encourage more customers to switch to gas. We're not trying to encourage anybody to use more gas. We're just trying to help the existing situation. Next slide, please. So I also stated this in my previous presentation, but I include it here again. Customers want the ability to choose. They want to be able to go on, the Power Switch website, Power to Choose New York, and they want to be able to see a whole variety of things. They want to be able to choose. The current reset order rules prevent a variety of choices, especially on the gas side. I included an example here below. This is from the Pennsylvania Gas Switch website, which has only over 60 offers in one zip code alone. And some of these offers are of the cleaner heat nature. So if anybody wants to look that up, they can go on Pennsylvania's website and find these offers out there. Next slide, please. Carbon offsets should be allowed today. They're verifiable, standardized, and easily calculated. In addition, as presented in my previous presentation, there are other options. There's the Regi gas product that was discussed. There's Rex, and there's also some other products, renewable natural gas, reasonably sourced gas. For some reason, I always have trouble saying that one. But there's a lot of other options. I included those in the straw proposal that we provided to DPS staff, and happy to have further discussion on those. But for the time being, at a very minimal, some of these products should be able to be offered today. And again, these products will help New York meet the aggressive CLCPA goals. It's a win-win situation for the state. Next slide, please. So this is something that occurred to me over the last couple of weeks with everything going on in the Ukraine. Natural gas is secure and reliable. It's American-made, relatively inexpensive compared to the other fuel sources. It's secure and reliable. Electricity, wood, oil, propane, and kerosene all have the potential for shortages and price increases, especially as we continue to rely on foreign countries for supplies. So it's important that we keep that in mind going forward. Natural gas cannot simply just go away overnight, as I stated before, so efforts should be made to try to make it cleaner. Next slide, please. Carbon offsets and other renewable energy products simply cost more. We know that. We know that around the state, as we're looking at more of these renewable technologies, on the power side, wind, solar, all of these things cost more. These products must be allowed without any price constraints. And that's really, really important, because if caps are put on these products, they will likely not be offered. And that would be a shame for the state of New York. Next slide, please. Oh, and that's the end. So that's all I wanted to cover today. As I said before, my previous more thorough presentation is available on DMM if anybody needs to take a look at that, or feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have a question or want to discuss something. My contact information is here. So I don't know if there's any questions right now, Robin, or if
Thank you so much, Angela, for the presentation. Staff really appreciate you taking the effort to put that on today. We're just going to take a look and see if there's any questions. We're opening this up for discussion.
Okay.
John, just let me know if there are any hands raised or if anybody wants to speak. So I do see one question here. The question is, what does it mean to make gas cleaner? Angela, can you respond?
Thank you. I was going to say, I think I'm muted. So, I mean, there are obviously several ways to do that, right? So we can do carbon offsets, which means that we are just taking the natural gas and offsetting the emissions by doing something else in the environment, right? By sponsoring a project that is out there to reduce emissions. Or as I stated before, there are other products that are coming out. One of them being renewable natural gas, which is methane captured from organic waste at landfills, livestock operations, farms, and sewage treatment plants. There's also something called responsibly sourced natural gas, which is gas that an independent third party has verified as meeting the highest standards and practices to minimize the environmental footprint. I've been at several conferences over the past few weeks, and hydrogen was a big topic of conversation as to whether or not hydrogen could be added to gas to make it cleaner. That is a little far off at this point, but it is something to look at for the future. So there are definitely ways to do this. And like I said, any effort that could be made, you know, is helpful at this point.
Thank you, Angela. Do we have any other questions or discussion topics that we presentation? Just giving everyone a moment if they want to raise their hands. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on. John, if you could bring back up the DPS slideshow, please. Oh, thank you. Next slide. The next topic for discussion today is a definition of small non-residential customers. Small non-residential electric customers are currently defined as a non-demand meter customer and a small non-residential gas customer, defined as those using less than or equal to 750 decatherms per year. From the September 2020 order, the Commission directs that Track 2 of these proceedings further consider whether the current definition of a small non-residential customer that would fall within the mass market and, as a result, be subject to greater consumer protection regulation best balances consumer interests. The definition of small non-residential customer shall be addressed in Track 2 of these proceedings, with a revised definition proposed to the Commission for consideration as appropriate. Next slide. Okay, and today speaking regarding the definition of small non-residential customers, David Lundeen from Arabido. John, if you could unmute David and pull up his first slideshow, please.
Hi, everyone. This is Dave Lundeen. Thank you very much, Robin, and thanks, John and Tom, for giving me the opportunity to present here. My name is Dave Lundeen. I'm a Senior Vice President of Mirabito Power and Gas. I've been involved in the deregulated market since the beginning, and certainly have been involved with the resetting order process since its onset in 2016. I have three very brief presentations that address three very specific points. They were designed this way to be very specific, and they're fairly small in scope. I'll go through them rather quickly. If we can maybe have a discussion after each one, that might be the best way to do it. But I'll start with question number one, or proposal number one, which is addresses the question that Robin just raised and the definition of small non-residential natural gas customer. John, if you could go to the next slide. These comments that I'm making today were prepared with input from and are under consideration by the ESCOs that you see here. And at the end of the presentation, I'll ask any other ESCO that's interested in joining on to simply email me, and I'll provide my address at the end of the presentation. Thanks. Next slide, John. So as Robin summarized a minute ago, the current definition of small non-residential natural gas customers or customers is for electric, any non-residential, non-demand metered electric customer. It's a fairly simple definition. For natural gas, it's a non-residential customer with annual consumption less than 750 decatherms per year. This definition was established in the original order in February of 2016 in a footnote. There was some discussion over the level, over the actual threshold number back in the 2016 to 2019 timeframe, but ultimately in the final order and the final guidance and documentation, it was decided to revisit that number in these Track 2 proceedings. We think it's a great time to revisit it, and we have good reason to revisit it. It's certainly a very different world than we were in when we entered into this resetting order process back in 2016, and certainly even a much different world and energy market over the past year. So it's a great time, we feel, to revisit this. So again, the point of this presentation will be to address whether or not 750 is the right number. And we have developed some qualitative reasons that we feel address small businesses, and some quantitative reasons. So just fair warning, there'll be a little bit of math involved here in a second, but we'll keep it light. So qualitatively, why should we revisit this definition? Well, 750, small commercial customer, 750 decatherms, what that really represents is a segment of small businesses. And we feel that these small businesses can definitely have advantageous load characteristics that give them different opportunities for pricing that would be better than a one-size-fits-all default price from the utility. They have, I'm sorry, John, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So again, qualitatively, small businesses can have advantageous load characteristics. They can have very flat load. They can have process loads. It can be used for baking, cooking, dry cleaning, which gives them advantageous pricing over default load-shaped heat load pricing. And like many restaurants, dry cleaners, and bakeries, we have found out very clearly over the last couple of years that many of them fall just under the 750 decatherm mark, and often can swing up and down through that level depending on what kind of year it is and what their process may be doing. We also feel that small businesses should have an opportunity to exercise their prerogative and differentiate themselves from competitors by using competitive products that the deregulated market provides, that ESCOs can provide. They can have gas supply costs that get significant in their budget. $7,500 annually is just an example. That certainly could go higher or lower than that based on gas costs, but it's a significant line item in their budget that we would like to allow them to manage. Small businesses are generally also excluded from default hedging programs and routines that the PSC has for residential customers. They aren't afforded that same benefit of volatility management like we saw in Con Edison very recently. They're large enough. Customers with 400, 500, 600 decatherms of load are large enough to solicit very clean competitive offers from the market. There are plenty of ESCOs out there that will vie for that business. And we also feel that small businesses and small commercial customers like this have a need for budget controls, such as nonprofits. They have a need for price spike protection, and they have a use for the products that ESCOs provide in the dereg marketplace. So those are some qualitative reasons why we feel that consumers of this level, 300, 400, 500, 600 decatherms of gas annually, should be afforded an opportunity to take deregulated products. John, if you could please, the next slide. So here's the math. So we talked about qualitatively. Now let's talk about quantitatively and just let the numbers speak for themselves. So the intent here is to take a look at the electric small customer threshold and compare it to the gas small customer threshold on an apples to apples basis by doing a BTU to BTU comparison. And then you'll find out in terms of energy consumption, the gas threshold is much higher than that of the electric threshold. So the electric threshold, again, as I mentioned a minute ago, is non-demand. So a utility will establish whether you're non-demand or not by one of two methods. Either they will provide a demand threshold in their tariff, say 5 kilowatts. If you're over 5 kilowatts, you're demand. If you're under 5 kilowatts, you're non-demand. Or they may give you a monthly volume threshold. So I'm just going to explain the math in this comparison. If you are measured using a peak kilowatt threshold, such as 5 kW, the math works like I've shown here. You have a 5 kilowatt peak. We're going to assume you have a 70% load factor. A load factor just is a conversion. It's a ratio that's applied that recognizes not everybody uses 5 kW for every hour of the year. There's typically a peak and then a load shape. So the load factor is just a factor to address load shaping. So at a 70% load factor over 8,760 hours a year, that would mean someone who had a peak of 5 kilowatt hours or 5 kilowatts would use about 30,660 kilowatt hours per year. We take that 30,660 kilowatt hours per year and multiply by, this is just physics, the standard conversion on BTU to BTU to decatherms per year, and that volume of usage in kilowatt hours equals 105 decatherms per year. That would be an apples to apples BTU to BTU comparison. Similarly, in the example below, if the utility measures you in kilowatt hours or actual usage per month, similar formula applies. 3,000 kilowatt hours per month, which is an actual example, I believe, from RG&E on what places you in a demand or non-demand category. Again, using a load factor of 70% on average, times 12 months a year, would be approximately 25,000 kilowatt hours per year. Converting kilowatt hours per year to decatherms, that would be equal on an apples to apples comparison to 86 decatherms per year. So sorry for the kludgy math there, but it is basic physics. This is just an apples to apples BTU comparison. And John, if you could please go to the next slide. So this is a comparison across most of the utilities in the state about what their demand and non-demand thresholds are for electricity. And it converts that based on that same approach that we just described to equivalent annual decatherms. So as you can see from the list, I won't go through this in detail, but there's a range from as low as an equivalent of 23 decatherms per year of energy consumption to 251 decatherms a year of energy consumption. And again, that's based on the actual demand thresholds for electricity per utility tariff. John, if you could go to the next slide. So to summarize this fairly simple proposal, we are requesting that we reduce the gas threshold from its current level of 750 decatherms to a level to be discussed and agreed upon eventually, I hope, as low as 250 decatherms. We feel that there are compelling qualitative reasons for this as we addressed those circumstances that small businesses encounter. And we feel there's compelling quantitative justification based on an apples to apples BTU comparison. I would just ask that any ESCOs that are on the line or any ESCOs who would like to join on to this proposal, make comments, or have their thoughts included, please just email me at the address you see here, at the email address you see here, and I'd be happy to include your thoughts and comments in a white paper draft that we've already submitted to staff for their consideration. That is the end of the first request. John and Robin, can we take questions now if there are any?
Of course. John, just let us know if there are any hands raised for questions.
There is one hand up, it looks like, from an Alex Judd. Alex, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Great. Oh, actually, the comment I had goes back to Angela's presentation on green gas. But David, I do have just a question or comment for you, which is about kind of standardizing the volumetric thresholds, I guess, for the definition. I'm calling in on behalf of a couple ESCOs and didn't know if you were going to get to, in the other parts of your presentation, kind of the benefits of having kind of a standard level threshold across the board for small commercial customers, just so we, as ESCOs, kind of understand what that limit is. So let me just pause there. I can offer my thoughts, but if you're going to get to another part of your presentation, I don't want to kind of get ahead of you. So I guess let me ask that question, then I can just go back real briefly to green gas.
Okay, Alex. Well, this presentation is specifically for natural gas, and there is a standard now at 750 decatherms, and we're looking to reduce that lower. So we're looking to reduce it to something as low or somewhere below 750, but as low as 250 as a standard. Are you talking about standard making one decision for both commodities?
Yeah, and for the electric in particular, David. Yeah, of course.
Okay, so the electric right now is any non-demand customer. So that is the standard there. There is a presentation later on today by Ron Lucas about unifying the decision as to whether someone is mass market or not, based on if you're not for one commodity, you wouldn't be for any. So that is coming up a little bit later.
Yeah, and I think there's, just a little bit of a desire too at some point to discuss, what is that definition for the electric side? Because, when you talk about demand meters, it's a little bit hard to understand what that is, when you look across different utilities and different perspectives. And, there are some other states that are, I guess, looking at this now, looking at kind of standardizing what would be a volumetric definition for non-residential customers, more uniform across the state. I think Massachusetts is looking at this right now and is, targeting kind of the 15,000 kWh for the electric side. So, there may just be a good conversation there, so that it's not utility by utility, as we ESCOs kind of look across this and have something more uniform and more standard to kind of think of what a small non-residential electric customer looks like. So I just offer that up.
Sure.
And-
Hey, John, could you go back to the chart on page 5, I believe? Alex, it's a good question. It's come up a lot lately. Actually, it's on page 6.
Yeah, because that page, David, I think you're right. You can see the kind of fluctuation between them and what that looks like.
Right. So that would be a totally different approach. That would mean this is based on utility tariff designations, and they do. You're absolutely right. They vary by utility. And specifically, these are all pulled directly from the utility tariffs, and they result in definitely different consumption levels. So that would be a different approach. This decision is focusing specifically, and I think that Ron will address this when he speaks in a little bit, but this presentation is specifically aimed at addressing the question that was raised in the final order and pushed to track 2, which is the gas definition of 750 adequate? So I think we will address the electric side of this a little bit later, but this proposal is strictly addressed at answering that question of, is the 750 decatherm small gas customer threshold properly set?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I do appreciate that, David. Let me just jump back to one thing in the green gas. Well, I have the floor, and then David, I'll turn it back to you for the rest of your presentation. And I just, because I'm calling on behalf of some other ESCOs, I did just want to support, what Angela was saying and just kind of stress a couple of points she was making that I think are really important as we think through what green gas products look like. And one of them is the inherent flexibility. She mentioned several potential innovative sources for cleaner heat in the future, and we should just kind of take those into stock now and kind of understand that these products could be developed over time, and so that's future looking. But today we do have products that we could offer into the market, to kind of help customers who want to take advantage of this, and there are those customers that really do. And Angela mentioned a couple of them. Reggie is one, just to kind of stress it taps into an existing budget trading program that has a system in place where normally it's fossil fuel generators that are participating in these auctions, but ESCOs can participate in them too. These quarterly auctions, it does allow for essentially getting those offsets, and there is using EIA data, easy ways to convert natural gas usage from customers into something that that essentially we can go into the Reggie market and either hold those allowances, put them in a segregated account, do something to show compliance for fulfilling those products, and that would offer New York customers all the advantages that Angela mentioned of trying to make more efficient their usage. And while an additional benefit of Reggie is the money from some of the auction proceeds also flows to the state. And if you go to Reggie website, and we'll lay this out in our ESCO filings as well, you can see some of the additional benefits that New York gets from these Reggie auction dollars. And, that's an even further consideration in addition to all of the other wonderful benefits that it brings. So, I just, again, want to just take a minute, since I know there wasn't too much discussion on that, to stress what Angela is saying, the flexibility, along with the fact that Reggie, among other programs, can be, implemented as part of this Track 2 discussion to start providing New York customers benefits from day one. So apologies to be late to that discussion, but if there's any further follow-up, I'm happy to answer questions. Or David, you can finish your presentation. We can circle back to this after.
Hey, Alex, what ESCOs do you represent?
So we had made filings on behalf of a couple ESCOs. I can send you, David, the list offline, and they might want to participate in some of what you're putting together.
Okay.
So I'll follow up with you offline on that.
It looks like we do have another hand raised as well from Natara. I'm going to unmute you now, Natara.
Everyone. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Natara Feller. I'm working with several ESCOs under the New York Retail Choice Coalition. And we worked really closely with David and Angela and a few other folks in the industry to collaborate on these presentations. You know, with respect to the green gas definition and threshold, my feeling is the most useful, the best way that we can really utilize our time and staff's time for this conference is to really, you know, maybe focus in on determining what is an appropriate and reasonable metrics for determining a small natural gas customer. You know, one of the comparisons here on the chart that's currently displayed is, you know, showing the range in quantity on the electric side by the demand meter metrics. It's still quite a range, but comparatively, when we're looking at how that translates on the gas side, while it is, you know, maybe a significant range between, you know, 57 in National Grid and 251 in RG&E, that number is still almost a third of what the current metric, the current threshold is at 750. I think it would be really helpful to maybe get some feedback from staff or other participants on why a lower number than 750 is reasonable. I know some of the ones that we've discussed here are, at the very least, demonstrating the disparity between the size of or the impact of that measurement, looking at it through the gas lens on the 750 versus through looking at on the gas end through a quantity threshold versus on the electric side looking at it through whether it's a demand or non-demand meter. You know, so I'd really like to hear some feedback. Maybe, I don't know if there's folks from consumer protection groups or from staff or from some other perspectives that could really help facilitate moving this conversation forward and really getting at, you know, what maybe are the central questions or the issues or concerns that, you know, that other stakeholders have besides the industry.
Well, John, are you seeing any hands raised?
I'm not. I'm keeping an eye on it.
Okay. So, Natara, thanks for the input. And I would agree it'd be good to get feedback on this, but to make sure that it's not too confusing, this is a simple apples to apples comparison. And I think Mr. Judd brought up the fact that it does go through a range. You know, there is a range. Non-demand emitters have a range of actual consumption. But let's not lose sight of what this presentation is about, which is simply visiting the 750 decatherm threshold that was established initially and providing some qualitative and some quantitative reasons that we think it could be reduced and that reduction would be beneficial to small business customers. Again, John, if you can just go to the last page of this, please email me if you would like to be included or have comments or would like to refine this presentation and any submittal that we make to staff going forward. That's all I have on this particular presentation, John.
Are we moving on to your next one, David?
Yes, if there's no more questions, we should, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. This presentation, too, is simply a clarification of how the assessment process of determining whether a small non-residential gas customer is in fact mass market or not. John, if you can go to slide 2. This was developed with the same group of people who provided input and are considering the content of this proposal. Next slide, please. So, just by way of introduction, everyone who's on this call who operates a gas ESCO has to make a determination whenever they look at a gas customer's business to determine, are they over or under the threshold? That's the test to determine whether or not someone is a mass market natural gas customer. And accordingly, could only be offered products as described in the order, compliant products that were adopted by the order. So the method for doing this was established in a footnote in the order of September 20, 1920. It did not appear in earlier orders, although there was some documentation and policy guidance provided by staff in the interim, but it did not appear until the actual final order. And there's little documentation or discussion of how this was arrived at, but it's a fairly simple process. So the current guidance that was arrived at, again, and described in the footnote in the 920 order, was customers are to be considered in the aggregate, meaning all their accounts, all their natural gas accounts could be considered in the aggregate, added together to make the determination. It describes the process as an annual look back. It also states that it's to be performed at the time parties enter into a contract, and that ESCOs must assess the most recent available billing data for prior 12 months of usage. There's one clarification in the last sentence of the description on the process, and that is if a contract has a duration less than 1 year and it automatically renews, then ESCOs are not required to reassess usage before each renewal, meaning each month, but they are required to reassess usage every 12 months to determine if the customer is mass market or not. So that is the extent, somewhat paraphrased, but that's the extent of the definition and the process to determine whether a customer is under the threshold and then thus becomes mass market and subject to compliant pricing only. John, if you could go to page 4, please. So what we're asking for in this proposal is a clarification and a slight modification to the method. First, a clarification. It describes the process as an annual look back. I think that really we believe it needs clarification to say it's not truly an annual look back. If a customer is determined to be above the threshold of 750 and enters into a contract term of 1 year or greater, the assessment is valid. The initial assessment is valid until the end of that contract term. So for example, if someone entered into a 4-year contract because they passed the test at the time of contract entry, there would be no assessment required until the end of that term, at which time a reassessment would have to happen. Conversely, if the contract term was less than 1 year, the requirement as stated in the original order would remain. You have the responsibility to assess that customer no less than once per year. So if a customer was on a month-to-month market product somehow, I think all this has actually worked itself through, but no less than once a year, the assessment would have to happen. So that's point 1 is a simple clarification. If you enter into a contract term based on a test that shows the customer is not mass market, that assessment is valid till the end of that contract term, at which time, whatever happens, an assessment would be required again. Point 1. Point 2, we would like to address expansion of the period used for assessment. Right now, the order, the footnote that described this process asks us to use the last 12 months. We're suggesting an expansion of that assessment range to 36 months. In other words, you can, then that would account for temporary load variations where someone may have shut down, someone may have had a business interruption, And certainly, the elephant in the room, I guess, is to address historical consumption impacts from things like the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had many, many small customers whose gas usage is typically maybe under 1,500, who went through major downturns during the pandemic, and their gas use dropped to nothing or very small amounts, and now they are returning, but their last 12 months of usage is not representative of what their actual consumption is. So 2 points on this page. Clarification of, is an annual assessment required, and it's based on contract term, and then 2, modifying it to allow the test to use the last 36 months. John, if you could go to page 5, please. So this is our proposed wording, not literally, but fairly close. We'd like to propose that the process states following. It shall be conducted at the time the ESCO and customer enter into a supply contract. It'll be established using most recently available meter data. Use the highest consecutive 12 months consumption over the past 36 months. And shall consider facilities in the aggregate for accounts held under the common ownership, regardless of utility, territory, rate classification, or supplier. Meaning that if you have accounts with utility and you have accounts with ESCOs, different ESCOs, all of them can be considered in the aggregate. And then to address the terms of contracts, if the term of the contract is 1 year or greater, the assessment that was initially made remains valid for the initial term of the contract, whether that be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or multiple years. And if the term of the initial contract is less than 1 year, that the assessment be performed no less frequently than once per year. That, in a nutshell, is our proposal for a simple definition of the process and how you define a mass market gas customer. Again, I'd like to ask any other ESCOs who would like their input or to be recognized on this or to modify or input on this proposal, I'd ask you to email me at my address there, david.mundine@moravito.com. And that is proposal number 2. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them. John, if there's no hands raised, I think we can go to presentation 3.
Hey, John, before we move on, this is Tom Dwyer from staff. I'm just trying to think through some of the proposals and really make sure that staff has, our understanding in place. And one of the things that I think might be helpful, and I understand you probably don't have it handy here, is maybe an understanding of what typical, usage of these small commercial customers is. I feel like sometimes we're talking about this in the abstract a little bit, like 750 or 250, somewhere in between. But ultimately, kind of going back to what the commission's policy was here is, providing or affording additional consumer protections to these customers, and so using kind of usage somewhat as a proxy for that sophistication. And obviously, it's difficult in trying to draw a line, but it's even more so without actually kind of understanding exactly what the population is here and, what type of characteristics we're looking at. And so I'll just kind of put that out there generally as something that I think it would be helpful to get more insight on as we develop our thinking on this. And if you would like, you had a point on clarification on your last one. If we want to go back to that real quickly, I think that what you described was right. But if you don't mind, John, if we go back to that slide, I wanted to just to. So let's see, where was, here we go. So to be clear, for this calculation, it is done, as you point out, at the time of contracting. And then obviously that contract is valid. And that determination as to whether or not a customer is mass market will stand for the term of that contract. As you mentioned, the distinction or kind of a carve out or exception made to that is more or less with the month-to-month agreements, which technically expire and renew every month. ESCOs are not required to do that reassessment every month, but as required must, if a customer is going to continue to be served on that month-to-month agreement, must at least once annually kind of verify that they are still mass market or they are still not mass market.
Right. That last point doesn't change anything. So essentially, if this started in April of last year, by April of this year, anybody who was on a month-to-month would have had to have an assessment and would have been classified one way or the other.
Right. Yep.
So Tom, your thoughts on this? I mean, this is a minor, kind of a minor change. It really just does the footnote in the order of 2020 really kind of, it says it's an annual look back. In reality, there isn't an annual look back if there's a multi-year contract in place. So this request is to establish when are you required to actually run the test, and then second, what is the period of data that we can look at to run the test? Now, agreed that we're putting in question whether 750 is a number or not, but either way, this is just the rules for making the assessment, whatever the threshold level is.
Yeah, that's right. And kind of going to your recommendation for the expansion here, this is something particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic that has been raised as an issue. And the idea of expanding it, to 36 months or to sometime beyond 12 months has been recommended. You actually had said, and let's see, can I go forward here? I think I can. Yeah, you had mentioned on this slide using the highest consecutive 12 months over that period. And actually, I just reread it. I missed the word consecutive when you read that. So I was thinking you were just picking the highest 12 months over 36 months. And I was going to have some concerns with that. But just for clarity then, this is just giving an ESCO who's doing this analysis a 36-month window from whenever they're contracting to look backwards at the customer's usage. And then if there's 12, and they pick the 12 consecutive months that met the highest usage, that's what you're proposing?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I definitely, like I say, open to suggestions for how to address this issue. I think one obvious downside, which is at play for any time period, is what do you do if there's not that much, 36 months of data available, which it has come up even when there's not a full 12 months available. So that's just one downside with putting a longer range, is you might run into a bit more of that of just not having that many months of usage data.
Agreed, but I would think by and large, long-term customers, there may be a few that get caught in that not having enough data, but that's, I think this is a fair test that will solve most of the problem. I don't, there are going to be a few exceptions like that where someone may have to wait until they have sufficient data.
Yep.
All right. John, are there any other hands raised?
No, David, I'm not seeing any. I can move to your third presentation if you like. Oh,
Okay.
It looks like Natara has her hand up.
Okay.
I'm muting you now, Natara.
Thank you. Tom, to follow up on your comment, it's really helpful to get that kind of feedback in terms of the types of comparisons that staff is looking for in order to determine what would be a reasonable threshold. I think it's potentially very sort of difficult to look, at the value. Well, I think it's difficult to potentially look at that just from the perspective of energy consumption. That's one comparison. I'm curious what specifically you're looking for. And one of the references that jumps to my mind was, I believe this was one of the comments in Ron Lucas's Great Eastern testimony or their brief in the reset hearing, but I think it was a comparison to, you know, what a four-family, what is considered a four-family unit, the usage of a four-family unit, and the four-family was used specifically because four-family and above, I think, is treated differently for loan purposes. And I believe that quantity was something like 400 decatherms a year. Ron might be able to provide clarity on that point, but I'm just wondering if you could provide some more guidance on the types of parallels that might not specifically be on energy consumption, but on how other industries view commercial customers and treat them differently because they're more sophisticated. For example, the four-family would be treated differently in a loan process versus maybe a smaller multifamily unit home. So looking at through the perspective of what qualities define this type of customer as more sophisticated than another one.
Sure, and I mean the kind of the obvious example is the definition of small non-residential customer for electric. That's based on a characteristic, not usage, mainly on you know, demand meters that's associated with larger customers, and that's you know, for a number of reasons, ESCO, or excuse me, a customer might be a demand meter other than just strictly usage in some instances. But as far as like, you know, just generally for this customer segment, the commission has stated, you know, an interest in using usage to kind of gauge whether or not a customer is falls into one category or another. And I mean, in part that's probably due to ease of administration. That's information that we have available, and it's something that can be, you know, used as a measuring stick across all customers, as opposed to just kind of pointing out like maybe some characteristic that might be shared by some customers in the group and not others. That's not to say that if there was, you know, a reasonable kind of defining characteristic that could help, you know, categorize, for lack of a better term, these customer groups, you know, we're open to suggestions as well. But from where I am, at least, there's nothing that comes to mind that would serve as kind of a good measuring stick for sophistication, other than you know, usage at this time.
It looks like we have another hand up from Ronald Lucas. Oh, Ron, I'm going to unmute you now.
I just want to jump in a little bit because I was going on the discussion.
Ron, you're very faint. If you could speak up into the microphone, we just barely hear you. Yeah, if you're speaking, we can't really hear you, Ron.
Hello?
Well, I heard that. So that's a little better. It's still a little faint.
Go to Max.
You were so loud and clear earlier.
I was on the phone. I finally figured out how to get on. Is this okay?
Yeah, I mean, it is still pretty faint. If you could just try to talk up right into the microphone, we'll do our best to follow along.
Thing on the WebEx. I don't using my. I'll talk into the microphone. Hopefully, this helps. I just wanted to follow up on the Tara's point, and Tom, I think you raised the point where the initial problem is trying to relate sophistication to consumption, which I don't know if there's anybody's ever going to find a clear way to do it. But I didn't want to forget that the original definition, without going through that painful experience, was done in terms of multiples of residential. I think the 750 came based on 5 times a residential customer, and it was a very high residential usage was used. I think David did a very good job converting the demand meter usage to what the equivalent gas usage would be. But again, it doesn't get to the sophistication argument. And I think when the Tara was going, when we put the testimony in about what qualifies for a commercial premise as far as loans and the number of dwelling units in a multifamily building. But also, I was going to touch on this a little bit. The whole commercial world, and I think David went into it, but we didn't go as deep as we could, and I don't know how far deep we can go. But when you do credit checks, yeah, commercial buildings have Dun and Bradstreet numbers, D&B numbers. They're completely different animal than a residential customer. And, you know, loan criteria, you have to show a business plan, you have to show cash flow. So really, I think where we're going is that, in general, the business customers, almost by definition, are more sophisticated, except that's not good enough. We need a threshold, and we have to go from there. So I'll get into why, if it's one, you know, good for one commodity, it's not good for the other later. But I don't know if we're ever going to get a clear line between the two. So we have to use proxies. But let's not lose sight of the fact, and I think David went into it, that commercial customers in and of themselves are just completely different animals when it comes to loans, business plan, credit ratings. There's a host of things. So I just wanted to inject that into the conversation. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, but we're stuck with using proxies.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Ron, are there any other hands raised? John?
Yes, looks like we have Natara's hand up again. I'll go ahead and unmute her now.
Thank you. Thank you. With respect to, you know, I understand, you know, the commission's guidance is focused on usage, and, you know, that's what we would prefer to do, and we want to utilize proxies appropriately. Tom, you may be more knowledgeable about this. Isn't the for purposes of HEFPA, isn't the four family you know, treated somewhat differently than a typical residential or a smaller multifamily unit? I'm curious what maybe the threshold is for HEFPA purposes, and you know, maybe that can provide us some sort of guidance where we could look at what type of multifamily unit, at what point it's distinguished between or treated as residential versus commercial, and looking at, you know, maybe what the annual usage is based on that could potentially be a helpful point to go from. And this is happy to answer more after the call. I just don't know offhand.
Natara, I would just want to clarify, this is Dave. I would just want to clarify that these first two presentations are addressing small commercial customers and the thresholds that apply to them. HEFPA and other matters of residential classification, we're going to talk about a little bit in the next presentation about requesting a clarification from staff on residential definitions. But I, for one, am I would say for my own standpoint, these size thresholds do equate the best proxy equivalent we can have for sophistication is size, because it results in a cost to someone that either makes them pay attention or not. And I think that it's the best metric that we'll find. We could examine a lot of things to try and determine sophistication, but I think size, the way we've got this headed, is a good measure of sophistication. So that would be my vote. But in terms of, I just want to clarify, these two presentations are addressing how do we classify small commercial. And Tom had a good question. Well, how many people are in this group we're talking about, and where does that threshold really lie? And I think that we only have so much information to determine sophistication. And right now, they're saying a gas customer is $750 or more. to be considered sophisticated or non-mass market, and electricity is non-demand metered. It's strictly for commercial customers. I think that the point I'm trying to make is that let's make that threshold as using the metrics that we have available to us as equivalent as it can be for both commodities. And that would be proposal 1, where we talked about moving it down from 750 to something lower. So I hope that we can address this commercial issue, Natara and Ron, in the next presentation, and then with Ron's discussion.
It looks like Ron still has his hand up. Ron, I'm going to unmute you now.
Dan, I forgot to put it down.
Oh, okay. No worries.
Yeah. John, thanks. If you're ready, we can go to the third discussion.
Proceed.
Okay, thanks, John. Again, this is really just requesting a clarification, and it gets a little bit to the point that Natara brought up just a moment ago, and addresses how do we define a residential customer. A lot of what is required out of the resetting order, it's very critical that we establish who is a residential customer and who isn't. And this is kind of this is a finer point that needs to be made here, but we would like to get clarity on the definition based on the questions in this presentation. John, if you could go to the next slide. Again, this presentation was developed with input and is under consideration by the ESCOs that you see there, and I appreciate their help on this. Next slide, John, please. So our current policy, this is statewide policy. This is public service law and statewide policy. But it allows the utilities in certain cases to provide residential rates for facilities that aren't necessarily or are actually not residential facilities. Now, without investigating or criticizing or even trying to change that policy, there are a lot of examples of religious organizations, churches, and other church facilities or religious facilities, multifamily dwellings, farms, and a few other isolated examples where people are placed on a residential rate for a reason other than being a legitimate residential customer. You typically, every utility tariff, typically, not in all cases, but this is in most cases an SC1 type rate assignment, service classification 1, where people are provided a rate that doesn't have a demand charge and does not involve a demand meter, and they're given these residential rates in lieu of the rate that they would be assigned as a commercial facility, which they actually are. So what we're asking for is a clarification here, and specifically how these customers that fit in this, I'll call it loophole or exemption, should be treated under the resetting order. And again, I want to emphasize, we're not criticizing, looking to change or alter the way utilities currently are allowed to provide these rates to such entities, but again, just to clarify how they should be treated under resetting order classification. So what our suggestion is just to continue and adopt and understand that the definition of residential customer will be as described in Title 16 of the New York Code, CRR. That same definition is adopted in the UBP and used in past PSC proceedings and orders. And again, this is not to impact the policy or the way the utilities administer it, just for resetting order treatment. Tom, if you, or John, I'm sorry, if you could go to slide 4, please. So, just quickly, John, go to slide 5 for just a second, and then we'll come back. This is the actual Part 11.2A2 of Part 16 of the New York Code. That is the definition. If you go back, John, to page 4, I've tried to paraphrase it here for simplicity of this discussion. And what it states is a residential customer is any person provided service at premises used in whole or part for their residence, where the utility tariff specifies a residential rate except for multiple dwellings or common areas. So it there points out an exclusion already, where service is primarily used for residential purposes, and that such utility service is provided through a single meter or to both units of a two-family dwelling, and that such person, and the rest is kind of superfluous, but was a residential customer 60 days before and is not terminated for doing any bad stuff. So in essence, the definition states a residential customer is someone who uses energy for residential purposes in either a single or dual family home. And that is it. The rest, maybe regardless of the rate class that may be applied to them by the utility, are not truly residential customers. So this proposal is asking for clarification and putting forth to staff a discussion. If we have specifically a church or a farm or that is a large 5,000 decatherms, million kilowatt hour user, even though they're on an SC1 rate, they are truly not a residential customer under resetting order rules. So hopefully that's clear. I would ask any ESCOs that would like to be considered or join in on this or make comments or improve this presentation, just email me at david.lundeen@morabido.com and we'll try and join together on it. And again, John, if you would just go to page 5, that is the actual definition from the code, which without me paraphrasing may be more helpful for you to read. And that is the extent of the presentations that I have today.
David, we're taking a look to see if there's any hands raised.
John, I want to thank you. You are the most accurate slide scroller I've ever dealt with. That was terrific.
Well, I do what I can, David. Thank you. It does look like we have one hand up from Jeremy Uto. Jeremy, I'm unmuting you now.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Excellent. I just want to make sure I follow that last comment about 16 NYCRR Part 11.2. And I just, we work with this a lot, and I just want to make sure I understand your interpretation here, because we could say it this way. So this is HEFPA. 11.2 is part of HEFPA. And you could say it this way. You could say this 11.2 defines who's afforded, you could call it like the super protections of HEFPA that are afforded to certain residential customers. But if I follow what you're proposing, David, you're proposing to flip that upside down and say that if you don't qualify for the super protection of HEFPA, that therefore you're not a residential customer, or shouldn't be considered a residential customer. And it,
well, I would just,
go ahead.
I wouldn't want to flip it upside down, because those protections are critical and important to anybody who's on that class. I'm just stating in terms of.
Yeah, I guess, HEFPA provides an additional level of protection. If you set aside the definition of residential and non-residential and utility tariffs, HEFPA provides an additional set of protections that are above and beyond. And this section identifies which customers are afforded those additional protections. But just because customers are not afforded those additional protections doesn't mean that they're not and haven't historically been considered residential customers. It just means we don't have to, utilities don't afford them the special protections of HEFPA.
Well, I would just make a distinction here that this would not change. This presentation would just strictly be an interpretation under the resetting order, and whether or not somebody is subject to the mass market rules of the resetting order only, not whether or not they would be afforded HEFPA protections or change their residential or commercial status with the utility. It's strictly as how is this interpreted for the considerations of the resetting order, which if you are a mass market customer, you're allowed to be provided compliant products only. And if you're not a mass market customer or residential customer, you're not required to have those compliant products. That's strictly resetting order clarification.
Yep, actually, that you've answered it for me. This is helpful. Now I think I understand. Basically, I think I follow what you're saying. What you're saying is, if a customer currently considered a residential customer by a utility, by its tariffs, et cetera, and by probably decades of practice, that if a customer doesn't qualify for HEFPA, you believe they should not be considered a residential customer?
No, I'm just stating that if they don't meet the definition here in Part 16 of being a residential customer, then they wouldn't be considered.
Right, but this part, this definition, I'm not trying to be argumentative. That's what this is.
They would still be eligible, subject to and under any HEPFA, but they would not, as part of a resetting order, be required to receive only compliant products. Strictly, so it has no change in the bearing of their utility status, their utility rate class. Just if they don't meet the definition of residential customer here, then under the resetting order only and specifically, they would be eligible for non-mass market products. That's the distinction, I think. It doesn't change any other protections or benefits or responsibilities that the customer would have. There still would be an SC1 customer, for example, under all the HEPFA rights and protections that are afforded them now. The only difference would be they would be eligible for non-compliant products, non-compliant resetting order products.
Yep. Okay, again, I think you answered my question. I did, I guess, while I have the floor, I might ask one other question, because I've been listening to this, and I'm trying to, I haven't heard any consumer advocates speak, but I'm trying to understand maybe if I've missed something. When staff defined the purpose of revisiting the small non-residential definition, it was, they're really trying to evaluate, according to the sort of mission statement that was stated at the beginning of this presentation, they're trying to evaluate whether or not the current protections afforded to mass market is being afforded to the right group of people. And I've heard a number of proposals, both to try and create some sort of, I don't know, translation between gas usage versus electric to therefore justify a lower gas threshold. I've heard questions about the different definitions of non-demand for electric customers, but I would tell you that the whether a customer's demand or non-demand is sort of an integral part of a much larger cost and rate allocation that's built in each utility's rate case that affects, customers that are at the edge of demand and non-demand. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of, sort of rate allocation that's potentially an issue over the question of whether a customer's demand or non-demand. It's unique to each utility. So I would just point that we certainly wouldn't want to try and open up that issue. But setting that aside, I've heard a couple different ways to potentially reduce the thresholds that have been established and that have been in effect now for a couple of years. I've heard different, proposals on how to reduce them. What I haven't heard is a justification for why it would be appropriate to strip away the protections that these customers currently receive. Again, maybe this is a non-issue for National Grid. is an issue because it does obviously affect our customers and customer satisfaction, customer pricing, et cetera. This would, if you take away the mass market protection, all you're doing is now you're allowing these customers to potentially be charged more than the utility would charge them. And the problem with that is, if we're involved in consolidated billing, we have to bill the customers for those higher numbers. And that does affect us. So again, I'm sure we're not alone in being potentially concerned about this, but I just haven't, I'm just wondering, if I've missed something, I haven't really heard a justification for why it would be beneficial for these customers to take away that protection. And with that, I'll turn it back. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. Let me try and address your question directly. This is a fairly nonpartisan proposal based on what we think are qualitative and quantitative reasons to change the gas threshold as staff and the commission originally envisioned we should investigate. Your comments all are centered around protections afforded to mass market customers. I'm not one who happens to think these are protections. I think they're limitations. But we can have our differences on that. The first presentation went through what we think are the justifications. One, qualitatively, we're talking about small business customers. You kind of pigeonholed all ESCOs into one group of people that overcharge and single bill customers. That's not what I do. That's not what our business does. There are customers in that range who are small businesses who produce circuits, who make donuts, who dry clean clothes, that have very flat load sheets that can do very much better than your default heat rate. That's very worthwhile. That's a very worthwhile segment of the business people. And I think I went through, John, if you go back to the first presentation, I think I went through 2 pages of justifications that you may not have heard. Small businesses can be afforded competitive rates, should be afforded competitive rates, because they have characteristics that work well in the competitive market. And second of all, quantitatively, if we're going to look at energy consumption, let's look at it evenly. Let's look at what has been established. We have no intention of changing the paradigms for whether or not customers are designated as demand or not demand. It's a well-run and well-developed system, and certainly it's through years and years of tariff development. We're simply utilizing that very metric as a decision point on sophistication. And we should stick with it. I'm a firm believer we should stick with the metrics that the utilities have developed. We're just stating simply that let's compare apples to apples. Size of an electric customer who's considered unsophisticated or mass market, and size of a gas customer. Let's make those roughly equivalent. That's the qualitative or the quantitative justification for that. I firmly believe in a competitive market, and I believe that I serve a ton of customers who save money and fix prices and use other products that we have to manage their business. And I don't fall into a category of what I think you just described. And, we can agree to disagree, but I'm a firm believer in this competitive market. All we're trying to do is justify what the right level of sophistication is, and I thought we provided some compelling evidence for that in the first presentation.
So this is Tom, and maybe I could just chime in and provide at least my thoughts, if not all of staff's thoughts, on this kind of policy issue, particularly regarding residential customers. And, John, if we could go back to the third presentation, we're discussing the customers, like religious organizations that are served under a residential rate class, but don't look like your typical residential customer. I understand the recommendation here. One thought I'll just share is that, well, first of all, I do see these new requirements as protections not limitations. I mean, that's more or less how the commission has presented them. It's additional protections afforded to mass market customers, even going all the way back to 2016, where it was determined that more or less the retail access market is serving commercial customers pretty well, but the same benefits have not trickled down for residential and small commercial, which is kind of why we're even here talking about a definition of small non-residential customer. But again, the point I wanted to make was that there were specific policy determinations made to treat, again, religious organizations, for example, like a residential customer, even though they don't strictly fit into that definition in Part 16 of the regs. To me, it carries over that those same policy determinations would argue for treating these customers as mass market customers, even though they might not typically fall into the definition of residential. That's not to say that the commission couldn't change their mind on that point, but for at least where I'm sitting and the way I've thought of it is that yes, those customers that are afforded residential rate treatment would also be afforded these protections as a residential customer under the definition of mass market. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Tom, I think that's a great summary, level-headed summary, and I would agree with you on the last point about residential. That is, we would like to discuss it, but I also just want to continue to clarify. We talk about protections versus limitations. I think, you're calling affording mass market status a protection to people, whereas it also could be considered a limitation for some people. I have a whole line full of customers I can give you who will tell you that. Not to be argumentative, but just to make my
understand that practically speaking, these additional protections do provide limitations on the products and services that ESCO is concerned to those customers. But I'm just kind of going back to the whole reason I'm here doing this work is really with a consumer protection mindset, and that was the tone of the commission's orders. It was focused on additional protections afforded to these customers. Understand your point, though,
right, that
in practice that does that can result in less options for those customers.
Right, and I think a good one specific point that's a good dividing point is the commission has ordered utilities to provide volatility protection for the smallest of customers, for the true SC1s and the true residentials, with hedging programs that apply to those smallest of rate classes. Those don't get applied to these larger customers that we looped into mass market as small customers. Their only means to control volatility is through a competitive product. They're not afforded the hedge benefits in most cases. There are some exceptions in the state, RG&E being one, but they aren't afforded those automatic protections that HEFPA and that the commission have implemented for price volatility. And Tom, do you follow me?
I do. And that's why I said it's not to say that the commission couldn't kind of revisit this issue specifically and provide a carve out, but I was just trying to give you at least my take on the policy and why we're there right now, where we are right now.
Yeah. In terms of residential customer, I hear you. I'm loud and clear on that. I would agree. That's I think your point is well taken.
Okay, it looks like there's some other hands up. Looks like we have Natara, Ron, and Charlie Iannello. Natara, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thank you. With respect to the utility classifications, and I think that this does go to one of the reasons why we find the definition of residential customer under HEFPA helpful. you have different definitions under different, under a tariff. Small commercial customer may be defined one way in one utility territory and differently in another. It's defined one way in the UBP, defined differently in HEFPA. We could probably find 10 more definitions if we went looking for them. So it all adds to this confusion. And from the industry perspective, what we're trying to do here is find the balance on of these customers that are defined within the group, which ones truly should benefit and deserve to benefit from the protections that the PSC is providing to the mass market. What I think becomes challenging is when there's a definition of SC1 that includes certain customer classes that don't correspond to other types of limitations or thresholds that we're looking for. For example, the religious institutions that are categorized, I believe, under SC1 in Con Ed, and their usage is on par with larger commercial customers. And so it becomes, a question, not that we want to focus on, is this a customer that requires the protections, because that's not really what we're here to do. That's what the legislature did when they passed HEFPA. But if we're going to be looking at this based on a certain threshold or based on a certain way of measuring, it should be consistent. And if we're going to look at the classification where, one customer in the classification is, residential and another is a non-religious, is a religious institution, and their usage is much higher, then, what I would submit is that customer using higher usage should have the benefit of flexibility in terms of the types of products and benefits that ESCOs can offer those commercial customers, which incidentally was something that was concluded by the Commission in the reset order. They specifically found that commercial customers did benefit from ESCO products. It's something that, whether you're looking at it as a limitation or a protection, is potentially besides the point. If we're looking at this as, based on a finding that customers that use over a certain threshold, over a certain quantity, benefit by being able to purchase from ESCOs, because the ESCOs are potentially able to offer that customer a greater discount or a more flexible product because that quantity is higher. That's what, warrants treating them differently and providing them the flexibility of more types of products, which comes along with less protections. They go hand in hand. So, I don't know the history of why certain categories were added into SC1 or SC2, and I haven't done the analysis to see how definitions differentiate specifically across every utility. But any time I've done work in looking at the definition or how things are treated differently in the utilities across the state, there is some disparity, and what we're looking to is to find balance here, where certain customer groups, I don't want to say classes because I don't want to get that mixed up with utility classifications, but where certain buckets of customers should have more flexibility because their load is higher. They would benefit from more flexible products that can be, that can serve a load of that quantity.
Thank you for those comments, Natara. I'm going to move on to Ronald Lucas. Ron, I'm about to unmute you now.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. I just wanted to, I think Jeremy raised some interesting points, but I think that, and Natara brushed on this, and I think we need to do a deeper dive if we're really going to get into it. But David was clear, he wasn't looking to strip away protections. He was looking to just be able to provide these products to these customers. But my experience, and I did work at the utility for 28 years, and doing this type of work, and I did a lot of cost allocation studies, and I don't think it really has any direct bearing on cost allocation. But I think a lot of the exceptions where religious institutions, nonprofits, farms were put into SC number 1 were legislative. I think if you look at public service law, it specifically mentions churches. I think one of the reasons that they were put in there was not so much for consumer protection, but was to avoid putting in a demand meter. So I think we can't mix up the two concepts. We have to look from where these things come from. I don't think anybody would argue that a farm is residential, but somehow farms in certain classifications got put into the residential. I can't find that in public service law and where that came from. So I just don't think we should just casually ascribe why they're in SC number 1 for consumer protection. I think there are other reasons. I think it was legislative. Some people lobbied for it. So I just don't think we should leave it at that. Consumer protection is the main driving force. And I just don't think any decision should be made based on that. So that's my comment there.
Okay, thank you, Ronald. Or Ron, sorry. Charlie, I'm going to move on to you. I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I tend to agree with the comments of David and Natara, and particularly the recent comments that Ron just made. I mean, clearly farms and religious institutions should require a closer look as to the designation of residential and whether, that designation was really just for rate making purposes versus, consumer protections. We do see fairly large levels of consumption from those types of customers, and I don't think that the spirit of the reset order was to provide the protections as some have described them, but certainly there are limitations to service that those customers can receive. So I think those should certainly be looked at closely in this track 2 process with respect to designation of mass market or not. The one thing I did want to point out was the definition of residential customer in the UBP specifically says that an individual or occupant of a residential premise as defined is an individual or occupant of a residential premise as defined in 16 NYCRR part 11.2A2, which is the language that's up on the screen right now on page 5 of David's presentation. And if you look at subsection 1, it specifically says that the distribution utilities effective tariff specifies a residential rate for service. This would be considered a residential customer if the utilities tariff specifies a residential rate, provided, however, that no person who is supplied service to an entire multiple dwelling or for the common areas of a multiple dwelling as defined in the multiple dwelling law or multiple residence law shall be considered a residential customer solely because the distribution utilities effective tariff specifies a residential rate. So when you put the definition of residential customer in the UBP together with the cited section of the code, you see that multiple dwelling customers should not be considered residential customers, even if they are designated as residential in the utility system. And then if you go to see what multiple dwelling law or multiple residence law is, they have slightly different definitions of multiple dwelling customer. But they basically, they're old, they're from the 50s, but they basically say that, anything with 3 or more units is considered multiple dwelling. So when you put these two things together, it basically says that multiple dwelling customers are not residential customers. And so I think if you go back in this presentation a little bit, there was a question about, and it listed these different categories of customers, religious, farm, and multiple dwelling. And I think, the answer on multiple dwelling is clear. The code here says that they are not residential customers, even if they are designated as residential by the utility. And that's really all I wanted to point out there.
Thank you for your comments, Charlie.
We're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we will be back at 11:50. Welcome back. This is Robin Taylor. Again, just a reminder that everyone is muted. If you'd like to speak, just please raise your hand. The button is located at the lower right side of your screen. Now we're going to have a discussion regarding dual commodity from Ron Lucas of Marathon. And John, if you could unmute Ron, please. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me because I was talking loud before to try. Am I hearable here?
Yep, we can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay, so, well, first of all, I want to thank David for putting the presentation together for the other ESCOs. It was a lot of work, and we're all on board with what David presented. And I think Charlie's comments he just made is a good jumping off point to where I want to go. because when you get to the churches, this is just from memory, and probably some of the utility people know this. I don't know if the schools are covered. So you had to go through, like, the churches got the residential rate, the schools didn't, and it was a whole classification problem that was always a headache for the ESCOs to try to get it right. And I think if you look in some of the tariffs, you'll see that in there. But the point I want to get to is that it's the same people that are making decisions for electric and gas for the churches and the schools, even though they may be treated separately. Churches may be on a different rate than the schools. It's the same people paying the bills. So when you get to the question of consumption and sophistication, you really got to look at some common sense things here. So basically, that is the point I want to make, and it's not a technical point. That for gas and electric, you have, well, first of all, we teed up the issue that if you are not mass market for electric or gas, you weren't mass market for the other commodity. Now, we teed that issue up. The commission recognized it in its decision in the case, except they never gave an answer. They rejected that notion and they decided to keep it separate, but I had never heard explanation of why that was so. There was some general explanation saying they had to provide price protection for customers because they were paying more than they otherwise would pay to the utility, but I never heard an explanation why, if you were not mass market for one commodity, that you should be not mass market for both. That explanation never came through to me. So now you get to the point, kind of what's going on here. Well, it's the same person paying the bill, especially when you get to a small business. It's not like they have multiple people, one person focusing on gas and one person focusing on electric. That just doesn't happen. Also, if you look at the way some utilities bill, and I believe this is still true, and I think it comes out in the billing factor, some utilities have a single gas bill for electric and gas. It's on the same bill. So clearly in the accounting department, when they're paying the bill, it's the same person. When management decisions are being made, it's the same person. We went through some of the risk factors, and that's the big difference between residential and commercial when it comes to loans and banks and getting loans is the risk factor. What is the risk going to be paid back? There's two separate criteria, one for residential and one for commercial. And another point, which is very interesting, that recently was highlighted by the recent volatility in the Con Ed area, which I know is very problematic, where the electric rates shot up very high. I think they tripled or doubled in January, and I think Con Ed now is seeking to give some of the hedging money back in February or March. I'm not sure. This is an evolving issue, but I don't think anybody would deny that there was a lot of price volatility in the electric market, especially in New York and probably upstate as well, though I'm not as familiar with that. But let's look at what's going on here. If you're not mass market for electric and you're sophisticated enough to hedge your electric, when you go to gas, what's driving the electric prices, especially in the winter, where there's no capacity issues and no shortages of capacity? What was driving electric prices in the winter are gas prices. That's why you had the big fly up in the Con Ed rates, because gas prices were very high. And that was acknowledged, and they didn't return the hedges right away. I understand that. So to me, electric and gas are really the same thing. And if you look at David's presentation, that's what he was trying to do, is equivalize the BTU content between the two. So I just think that when we look at this issue, there is no real credible explanation as to why, if you're not mass market for one commodity, you should not be mass market for both. And in summary, that's kind of where I'm at with the issue. When we discussed the sophistication issue. I think, obviously the demand meter was used as a practical proxy. I think it's, it's okay. I mean, it makes sense, but there's no study done because you have a demand meter that you're more sophisticated or not sophisticated. It just seems to work. And it just makes sense that the other thing, it's not like these people have split personalities, that there's an electric side and a gas side of their brain. They're making different decisions. If they can lock into a fixed price for electric, they should be able to lock into a fixed price for gas. And with the recent volatility, that's even more important. And it couldn't have been highlighted better than the recent debacle in the Con Ed territory. So that's really not a presentation, but those are my comments on it. And I really think that I'd be really curious if anybody has a counter argument why they should be treated separately. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. We're just going to take a moment to see if anyone has any comments.
Point. We didn't get it into David's presentation. But I think I'm going to speak to the group, and we'll probably, when we make a proposal, a store proposal, we'll probably put this issue in. We just had to get it. It was a timing issue.
Not seeing any. John, can you head to the next slide, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So for our future meetings on individual topics, any suggestions for what the next meeting should address? Oh, I see that there's a hand up. Oh, and it's gone. Okay. Oh, we do have a couple questions. Okay, John, if you could unmute Lucas, please.
I was kind of finished, I think, but I will say, if I think David took the first step, draft. I think Green Gas had two presentations. I don't know, as far as the next steps, would you advise as to where we would go with the small commercial?
Well, I think this is Tom. I think for the next steps on that, I would still need to digest the presentations and the discussion here a little bit today, and then perhaps getting some more information on the kind of the universe we're talking about here. Staff understands we may need to get some of that information directly from the utility, but at least in my mind, that's sort of the next step. Again, at the end of this call, we focused a little bit on the definition of residential and some other things. But going back to David's presentation and sort of the marching orders from the commission on this point, we are trying to focus on the definition of small non-residential customer. And particularly, I think what was in my mind that needed further discussion was the gas threshold. I think we have some good information on that, although I further discussions will probably be needed on what an exact number could be. But I think the policy reasons behind changes are clear. So really, I think the next steps are just getting some of that additional information, and then I think that information will help us kind of hone in on what a usage threshold on the gas side would, what may be more reasonable.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I'm a little late had a comment I wanted to make actually in regards to the first presentation, but maybe I was having a little technical difficulties, so I'll make it now if that's okay.
Please.
there was, and this may be a good opportunity because this might be something that would people would like to address further in the next meeting. I'm Lucas Grimes, the policy manager with the Center for Resource Solutions. We're a nonprofit that works with creating policy and market solutions, advancing renewable energy policy and design, and product disclosures, consumer protections, greenhouse gas reporting. Those are sort of our bread and butter issues. We also run the Green E certification, which is the leading certification for voluntary renewable electricity and carbon offset products in North America. Wanted to comment on the potential pairing of RECs with natural gas products. CRS definitely supports the ESCO's efforts to advance green gas products in New York. But the decision to allow ESCOs to retire renewable energy certificates for pairing with natural gas products to be marketed as green gas, this kind of raises very significant concerns for how these programs can be, responsibly marketed and what renewable energy claims subscribers can credibly and legally make. The understood market definition of a REC is that it represents the generational attributes of renewable electricity generation. So they're used, to demonstrate renewable electricity, the purchasing, delivery, and kind of used within the broader context of a functioning voluntary and also compliance markets. So when RECs are paired with retail electricity sales or customer electricity use, they convey all of these renewable, environmental, and the social attributes of renewable electricity generation along to the owner. And that's the use of RECs that's widely recognized, by multiple government entities, state legislation, including the state of New York, RTOs, and many NGOs and trade associations and other market participants. However, pairing RECs with natural gas sales or consumption, that doesn't actually produce a credible claim to renewable energy use for gas customers, and it represents an inappropriate use of the REC instrument. Even if you're converting like a mathematical conversion from like megawatt hours to BTUs, that doesn't really change what a REC claims to be. It doesn't affect the instrument or transform the attributes that it represents to be relevant in any way to gas consumption. So there's really no amount or type of disclosures for green gas products or programs that pair RECs with natural gas that would be sufficient to avoid misleading customers. So CRS believes that labeling programs that pair RECs and natural gas, labeling them as green gas, is inherently misleading to subscribers, since they're not receiving physically or contractually biomethane. We do support offerings of both renewable gas products that contractually deliver renewable fuels, and also we support products that pair carbon offsets with natural gas to deliver, these verified emissions reductions to offset the emissions associated with natural gas combustion. But ESCOs shouldn't be allowed to offer green gas products that pair RECs with natural gas, because it's a misuse of the instrument. It sort of dilutes the instrument's integrity and ultimately really misleads customers. So I wanted to, make these, just submit these comments for consideration in this and future meetings.
Thank you, Lucas. Helpful comments. And one thing I want to reiterate, I know we probably said this earlier on in one of the meetings, but these comments are all very helpful. These meetings are recorded and put on our webpage. Ultimately, though, there are no transcripts created from these meetings. And when we do get to a point of a proposal before the commission for consideration, like the comment period and all of that, we will be seeking stakeholder feedback, and we would hope that the folks participating in these collaboratives would be willing to provide those comments in writing for the commission's consideration.
Thank you.
Any other hands up at the moment? Oh, we've got one up now. John, if you could unmute Charlie, please.
Hi, this is Charlie Ainel again. So I just wanted to um, bring up one issue that we sort of moved around, didn't talk about directly, but um, we identified that, hey, there are these electric customers that, may not have a demand meter, but may have a very large usage, and ESCOs would be limited to serving them with mass market approved products. So, if you look at the like the conversions for across the different utility service territories for electric customers, it varies greatly across service territories, and so you know we it would be, I don't think we should just solely focus on gas when we're looking at the appropriate threshold. And it may make sense to move to a volumetric threshold for a number of different reasons. One being the discrepancies with respect to the implementation of demand meters. At some point, I suspect there's going to be rollouts of advanced metering to smaller and smaller residential customers, and there will be a question as to whether or not those customers have demand meters because of the advanced metering technology and the capture of demand measures by that technology. So it might not be a perfect demarcation of whether a customer is a mass market customer or not. And we should probably look at an equivalent usage level for electric customers. It would do away with a lot of the inconsistencies across utility tariffs with respect to customers that do or do not have demand meters in place. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Looks like Ron has his hand.
Looks like Ron has his hand up. Ron, I'll unmute you now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Oh, excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
We'll speak to the group, but I'm not sure. I think the criteria might be whether or not, because I did think about the smart meters, and even as a residential customer in Brooklyn, I'm on some experimental rate with Con Ed where my distribution charge is billed on the demand meter, not the some opt-out program, not the commodity though, which is kind of strange, but that's the way the program works. I'm not sure the demand. I think maybe the criteria should be whether or not you build using the demand meter and not whether you have the demand meter or not. Because I think really when you get to sophistication, what the commission is trying to do now is make all customers sophisticated so they can manage their energy usage. So it actually moves in the direction of making all customers sophisticated. But maybe just a simple, if the demand meter is being used for billing, that could be the criteria then. And I think that's where each utility does have its own criteria. So I just wanted to add that to what Charlie said, as opposed to going to a KWH threshold. I just wanted to add that point. We'll speak to the group.
Ron. Don, looks like Lucas is got his hand raised.
I think he's had that up by accident. I think we have Richard Bartlett up next. Richard, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thanks, John, and thanks to everyone for putting this workshop together today. Hey, Tom, just a quick question for you, and I apologize if you'd covered this already. I had to jump out for a phone call previously, but you mentioned that staff may be putting together a proposal for commission action on this. Could you just shed a little light on that in terms of next steps?
Sure. Actually, I didn't have a specific staff proposal in mind. I think, what we've discussed in some of these meetings is, and as actually you can see it on the screen here, is, discussing some of these issues, getting some more facts and some more information on the table, digging into this and then coming up with stakeholder proposals for commission consideration that are consistent with that discussion. Those could be take the form of a staff white paper or a industry proposal, any of the above. And I think we're, you know, based off of the presentations earlier and even into the last meeting, I think we're kind of getting to the point of either having like or pulling together a recommendation for the commission on green gas, or at least of just kind of isolating or identifying the group of stakeholders to do a couple breakout meetings to get us to that point. But that there isn't any, you know, like specific time frame or any date set in stone for that yet.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the additional color.
Okay, it looks like Charlie has his hand raised again. Charlie, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm getting down in the weeds and we're kind of at the end trying to wrap things up and put together steps forward, but I just wanted to provide a little bit more clarity on my comment previously. So I was talking about, you know, potentially considering usage thresholds like we do on the gas side for the mass market electric customer determination. But a number of proposals that were offered today would also address that issue. For example, if we were going to look at, you know, certain premises that were classified as residential, but clearly were commercial, even though they didn't have a demand meter and were consuming significant volumes, you know, 10, 15, 20, 100 times what a residential customer would normally consume, then that might be, you know, a way of addressing those issues and still sticking with the demand meter designation. But I've looked at multiple accounts over the years where there are hundreds of premises, and they might all be designated as residential, but they're a multi dwelling customer essentially. So they aren't classified as residential under the code. But even with the definition of mass market customer in the UBP, they would still have to have a demand meter. At least one of those premises would have to have a demand meter if they were under the same customer account. And it just seems to be entirely random. Like there could be ABC Property Management, and they have 200 premises, and every single one of them is a non-demand meter premise. And then they may or may not have like a maintenance facility or something that has one demand meter. Well, then they qualify for mass market. Or they may not have that maintenance facility with the demand meter. So these are the things that, you know, would really help to have some clarity and direction on, and make sure that those customers aren't, you know, subject to the limitations that we've talked about here with respect to product offering. So I just wanted to clarify my point previously.
Okay, looks like we, thank you, Charlie. It looks like we have Natara. I'm going to unmute you now, Natara.
Thanks, John. I have a suggestion in terms of, or a question and suggestion maybe for the process for the green gas proposal, and then also a couple of suggestions for the next meeting. In terms of a process for developing green gas products, I would suggest, and you know, and maybe get some feedback from staff on how to best accomplish this. But you know, there's so many different types of green gas products, and there's, you know, offsets with RECs, offsets with carbon credits. There's probably going to be something new next year that none of us know about yet, or maybe the trendy people do. But you know, if we were able to maybe, instead of look at specific product categories and instead focus more on guidelines, sort of the model that the Commission has in place for home warranty products, where there's certain guidelines and that staff utilizes to review specific submissions from individual companies, as opposed to you know, requiring those companies to submit a petition and go through a whole comment period. You know, it's a much more administratively efficient process. So I imagine at this point there will be specific green gas products we will be able to propose, which may take the form of the parallel to the electric renewable product, where it's a product that any ESCO can offer without requiring further review. I would suggest we also consider including guidelines that staff can utilize to determine whether future products fit in with that sort of that green gas umbrella, so that we don't have to go through a petition process every time a new technology or new product comes along. I think there's a lot out there already, and some that are being used in other states that provide guidance. So that's my suggestion. And with respect to the green gas, I guess the next steps with the straw proposal. With respect to follow-up meetings, potentially discussing green gas guidelines or product guidelines could be a topic. I also think it would be very helpful in future meetings to, focus specifically on the threshold, Tom, as you had mentioned before. And the other would potentially be looking at, maybe categories of customers that might be an exception to a threshold definition. So for example, if there's a threshold of 400 decatherms annually for to divide between small and large commercial customers, then we could say it's 400 unless there's an electric customer that has a demand meter, then regardless of their threshold, they'll be considered large commercial for these specific product availability purposes.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Natara. I did want to just for discussion purposes on the process. On your first point, I understand your point, and a number of parties have asked for, I think, that similar type of flexibility. And I'm not saying that that's out of the realm of possibility, but just given kind of the eligible products now and sort of the specificity around them, I do expect that when we're talking about authorizing sort of an eligible product, that it will need to be pretty specifically defined, as opposed to just saying, well, green gas is okay generally as long as it fits under these parameters. You mentioned, like the home warranty products as an example, but to me, actually, the home warranty product is still pretty specific. I mean, staff uses the approved products as a template, and there is obviously, even with other eligible products like the green product, there is some variation that ESCOs can put into these product offerings. But for the most part, it is still a pretty specific product. And the guidance to staff on what they can approve or not, like when reviewing the contract, are the commission orders. I mean, that's what in the UBP, that's what we look at for consistency to ensure that these contracts should be approved. So just kind of wanted to put that out there, that at least it's my expectation is that we're working towards a generic product that could be offered by any company, not just approved for one company or one group of companies, that is pretty specifically defined. And I say product, it could be 2, 3, or 4 products, but that are nonetheless pretty specifically defined.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I understand your point with the parallel on the home warranty. I think maybe just to be clearer, so with respect to the green gas and the concept of offsets, this is really what I'm getting at. There's carbon offsets, there's different registries that have that monitor and can authenticate carbon offsets. And then even within the carbon offsets, I've seen like deforestation related credits, or there's credits that are maybe tied to specific areas of the world or the country or communities. And so what I would suggest is that when we look at the definition of credits, or what could constitute an offset, that we apply some flexibility to account for the opportunities that, will make themselves available more and more in the future. Since regulations in government, we're always a few years behind technology and market what's available. I think to the extent that we can be specific in terms of what the authentication requirements are and the offset requirements are, but provide some flexibility in terms of what might qualify as an offset, would be beneficial both for the marketplace and for efficiency on the administrative side.
Right. Well, and I don't want to, like predetermine anything, but I will note like that is a point, like the type of offset or certificate is something that, at least in my mind, I think probably needs some specificity if we're going to try to ensure that, these environmental benefits are actually accruing and that the customer is ultimately getting the value that they're signing up for. So it's not to say that there's going to be just kind of one and only one carbon offset that's going to be acceptable. But in the same way that, when we refer to RECs on the electric side, everyone knows what we're talking about. And we even have subsets, whether it's tier 1 RECs or tier 4 RECs or what have you. But there's some specificity there. To me, I would have some concern with a proposal just to say, well, any carbon offsets that provide, these general types of benefits. Just again, I think the not knowing what is out there provides kind of just as much reason to be specific as it does to be broad.
Right. I'm happy to provide you with more information on this topic. I think when I refer to like deforestation or certain offsets tied to certain parts of the world, these are programs that have already gone through an authentication process with these registries. So if you give me the opportunity to provide you some more information, I think it'll provide a little bit more clarity on the on the extent of the flexibility that I'm talking about. I'm not looking for some loose words that aren't tied to any sort of grounded authentication or registration or review, but programs that are actually existing already and have not been vetted or really discussed or reviewed through this process yet. So I'm happy to follow up with you on more information.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great. I mean, that's why we're having these conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, looks like we have some other folks with their hands up. And they do look like they just came up. So looks like Ron and Lucas, not Ron Lucas, but Ron and Lucas both have their hands raised.
Okay, Ron, I'm going to unmute you now.
Double Lucas, I know. I don't know how to change that. Picking up on you were just discussing with Natara, Tom, I heard one policy pushback from CRS because of the carbon offsets, applying the RECs to the gas. So that's a policy issue, I think. Then now we're getting to a technical issue as to specificity. So I think Angela did a good job presenting the concept. Are we up to a technical conference then? Are we far enough ahead that there's going to be a proposal on green gas, and now we just need to have a technical conference to discuss more specificity, and maybe the ESCOs can present that. I know Natara agreed to follow up, but would that be a better way to proceed then? Is that where, leaving the policy issues aside about whether you're promoting gas or not, which I think we can address, and Angela did have some stuff in there about that. Is that where we're at? Are we on more technical issues at this point where we're going to move ahead, but we have to nail down specificity?
Yeah, I think so. And these concepts are starting to take some shape at even before track 2. And as we've discussed this further in track 2, and that's kind of, again, the slide on the screen here has, the formation of subgroups as a potential next step. I think, I don't want to preclude anyone from joining, but instead of having these large stakeholder conferences, it might make sense to have some kind of technical working groups to get into the weeds on some of these very specific issues before we advance a proposal. I guess theoretically, it could happen in the opposite direction, where we could put forth kind of a less fully fleshed out straw proposal, and then hold some technical conferences and things to fill some of those gaps. But yeah, what you described is essentially how I see this going.
Yeah, I think we need to work on that. I don't know the answer to give a general proposal versus a specific proposal, but I think we're down to technical questions, leaving the policy issues aside, at least with the green gas. And I think even with the, we owe you an answer on the small commercial as to the makeup of that market. I don't know. I would, off the top of my head, say have technical conferences and then give the proposal, but we could give the proposal and then do the technical conference with the understanding there'd be technical follow-up and target where the technical follow-up needs to be done. I don't have a quick answer.
Yeah, well, and maybe that's a good question, before I see, yeah, we still have a little bit of time here, but I wanted to leave some opportunity for other folks to chime in, not just on, what the next meeting is to address, but perhaps a preferred process specifically on green gas. Do we want to have another full stakeholder meeting with that on the agenda, or should we start looking into now pulling out or establishing a subgroup?
I think we're up to subgroups, but that's my opinion. I mean,
yeah, and honestly, I think we're probably there myself, but I'll leave it to others if they have insight. And actually, before we get too far off thing, I don't want to forget, we also have Lucas Grimes with his hand raised, and just in case it's on an earlier topic, let's go to him so he can make his comment question.
Okay, Lucas, I'm unmuting you now.
Oh, sorry, I think I forgot to put it down after my last comment. My mistake.
Ah,
oh, no problem.
Not a problem. That's a quick one then. So then, again, kind of going back to the next steps for green gas. Actually, maybe I'll back up before we even do that. We are going to be scheduling another one of these stakeholder meetings, and similar to meetings in the past, we'll issue a secretary's notice scheduling that meeting that will also likely solicit some feedback, questions or topics to be addressed. We've heard a couple here today, but folks will have another opportunity to share some insight on that. As prior meetings, this one included, we will look for folks that are interested to volunteer to provide presentations. Again, just want to thank the folks that presented today and at past meetings. It really helps guide the discussion and help us get down to some of what the key issues for decision are. And then again, more specifically to green gas, I think we may be at the point of a stakeholder group, or if others feel like we're at the point where maybe the industry just wants to come forward with a proposal, and then we'll address it through that process. Either way is fine with me. If we are going to go the stakeholder route, I think the best way is to just get folks to first kind of identify their interest, so we could start setting up those smaller group meetings. And let me just pause there. It does look like Natara put her hand up. Go ahead, John. Why don't you unmute Natara?
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, John. Quickly, with respect to subgroups, I'm just curious. I'm not sure if there are some other points of view on the call that that are listening and maybe haven't voiced their position, or if we haven't attracted that side of the stakeholder group for this particular meeting. But I'm just wondering if you anticipate those groups becoming more actively involved in the subgroup process, or if you know offhand, just by their nature, that like UIU, for example, would be participating on behalf of, I don't know, agencies. Because otherwise I think there's sort of like a lot of industry discussions going on already, but it might be, not the best use of time if the subgroup was representing one point of view.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, even just looking through the attendee list, it does tend to skew pretty heavily towards the industry side, not exclusively though. And that's something we'll want to make sure to, as we talk about, forming a subgroup if we do, making sure that we have the right people here. I understand not everyone could make every collaborative meeting. So, it may just be this meeting that has a slightly smaller representation of those other, like the advocacy groups, for example.
Thanks, that addressed my question.
With that in mind, though, I do think we'll be looking to ask folks to kind of identify themselves as interested in participating in any of these subgroups, particularly again to start off for green gas. And I think probably the best way to do that is just to have folks that are interested email staff. Just looking, John, would you be all right with collecting those emails, having folks reach out to you, and then we can create kind of like an invite list for working group meetings or subgroup meetings?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right. In fact, I'm not sure. Do we have? Nope. We have just myself and Robin's contact information on the last slide. Though folks of you that are familiar with the state emails will probably be able to deduce John Cheever's email. Follows the same mechanics as all the others. First name dot last name at dps.ny.gov. We'll ask folks again to do that, to identify themselves probably, sometime in the next few weeks, so that we could, I should say probably in the next 2 weeks, so that we could start scheduling those meetings. I'm wondering, usually we don't do a secretary's notice for the, asking people to identify themselves, but I'm wondering how the best way to make sure those that are interested and may not be on this call know of their opportunity to participate in the working group. So I might have to take that back on our end and just think about that a little bit. But in the meantime, again, I do want to ask folks that are on this call today, if you are interested in participating in a subgroup focused on advancing, green gas products, please reach out to John Cheever, say by the end of next week, so we could start getting, getting that list and coordinating some subgroup meetings. So I jumped ahead on our slide here. Natara, your hand is up. Was that from before, or did you have an additional question?
Sorry, I didn't lower it.
Oh, that's fine. So I guess I just want to pause there, and I'll ask, Robin, if there was anything else you had from a next steps perspective, or if any of our attendees have any more questions.
Thanks, Tom. I don't have anything else to add. Looks like Natara's hand is up again. Hang on. John, if you could unmute Natara.
Thank you. I have a question related to track 2 and generally, not specifically on the gas topic. With respect to some of the other follow-up items that the commission had designated in the reset order, will ESCOs have opportunity to have a further discussion on the financial posting requirement? I know, there was a white paper staff, I think there was a white paper, like 2.5 years ago, and parties submitted comments, and I think this was before COVID. So I'm sure there's been some delay in getting that next step. My recollection is that there was discussions that were potentially going to be held with the utilities, but I wasn't sure what the process was with respect to input from the ESCOs and other entities that might be subject to the requirements of the financial postings.
Sure. Boy, yeah, that's an issue I admittedly hadn't thought about in a little bit of time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
you're right
it's
that
in the fog.
a white paper prepared and issued, I think it was late summer of 2020. You know, we got comments and everything on that. That is arguably ripe for commission action now, though I think some of these other more pressing issues have kind of sort of jumped the line and have been, you know, we've been dedicating efforts to address these first. Though that is one that is still out there in pending consideration.
I appreciate that, and I really do. It's really wonderful, I think, for the industry that the focus is on developing the products right now, because that, you know, that has been a really big issue. So we're really appreciative that the commission is responsive to that. I would just ask that to the extent that there is development and discussions with utilities on these financial requirements, that there is opportunity for industry and stakeholder input before there's anything formally issued by utilities or by the commission, so that, you know, we're able to have a more efficient discussion, you know, similar to the process that we ended up following with respect to the data security requirements. You know, it turned into much more of a collaborative process, and I think ultimately that was a much more efficient way of reaching consensus on a reasonable contract requirement.
Right. And just for clarity too, you talked about having, you know, the financial discussions with the utility. If memory serves, I believe the only topic that the commission really directed staff to work directly with the utilities, as opposed to like working with like the industry, is on some of the billing issues and how to get like you know, place to compare, for example, on a joint or a consolidated bill. Those are also, though, discussions that, you know, they're on the list of things to do as we check through these track 2 topics, but we have not gotten to that point yet. But even with that said, you know, those discussions may sort of start and be primarily with the utilities, mainly focused around like billing capabilities and things like that. But, you know, change, you know, obviously changes and things like that will be noticed for public comment and have the opportunity to participate. You know, we have billing technical working groups all the time. So that's not to say that changes are just going to happen without stakeholder feedback.
Yeah, just the earlier we are involved with the discussion, I think the smoother the process goes overall, because then you're getting the representation as things are being developed, as opposed to a proposal that then people are just simply responding to.
Yep, point taken. All right, Robin, you were wrapping up. Was there anything else you had?
Nope, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Angela and David and Ron for providing some presentations and topics for discussion. A recording of the meeting and copies of the slideshows will be posted and available in DMM for viewing. Just give us a few days to get that up. And that's it.
One quick correction, Robin. We do not post the recordings in DMM. DMM sometimes has some issues with it, but we've got a pretty good process going now where we'll post the recording of this meeting on our YouTube page. And when I file the presentations, I'll include in my cover letter a link to that recording.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, so again, I'll echo Robin's sentiment. Thank you all for participating, particularly thank you to our presenters. And yeah, we'll keep an eye out for a notice for future meetings. Take care, everyone.